I'm your host, Jason Tartick, and welcome to Trading Secrets. We talk all things money on this podcast, and we're teaching all the stuff we just weren't taught in the classroom. Nothing supports this show more than liking, commenting, and of course, subscribing. Welcome back to another episode of Trading Secrets. Today, we are honored to spotlight a powerhouse who's not just building brands, but shaping the future of entrepreneurship. From co-founding the inclusive fashion juggernauts Good American and Skims to becoming the first Black woman to guest star as a shark on Shark Tank, Emma is a force in the world of business. With a keen eye for opportunity, a passion for equity, a voice that resonates far beyond the boardrooms, Emma is redefining what it means to lead, especially as a woman and as a woman of color. Today, we are going to explore her journey, the hustle, the heart, and the high standards that drive her, and how she is lifting the next generation of female entrepreneurs along the way. Emma, thank you so much for being on Trading Secrets.
What a lovely intro.
Yeah, well, you know what? You
that.
deserve it. I told you this before, but I went through your resume. I'm like, I need you for 10 hours, not for 50 minutes. How do we talk about everything you've accomplished in this short period of time?
I love that.
It's unbelievable.
So nice of you to say.
Yes. Well, I mean, I'm going to start out with this. Like, you know, from a high school dropout to Forbes, recognizing you as one of the richest self-made women in America, reshaping the thought process and the thought leadership of women in entrepreneurship. When you were that high school girl, did you ever expect that your life would be where it is today when you think about your career direction and things you've accomplished?
Such a difficult thing to say. Yes.
Yeah.
You know, in a way, it's so interesting. You know, I've said this before. We don't have yearbooks in England like you do here, which is such a lovely tradition. I love it for my own kids. But I kind of feel like I would have been most likely to succeed. You know,
Okay.
I was a hustler of a kid. That was just, I was born that way. You know, I was always selling something. I was always like trying to make money. I would always have a job. You know, I worked like a paper route when I was 12. Wow. I would sell things to teachers in like the recess time. So to me, it's like part of who I am is just finding a way and figuring stuff out. And so I feel like my entire career has really started from that place of just like being a hungry little monster and being a born hustler and like leaning into honestly like whatever opportunity was in front of me. And honestly, they haven't all been as wonderful as they are now.
Yeah, of course.
There's definitely some bumps on the way, but I feel like I'm kind of predisposed to being somebody that was going to succeed and going to figure it out for themselves.
It's amazing. And obviously you've had massive success. Some of these names you guys have all heard: Kai, Safely, Skims, Good American, the list goes on. Offseason brand, huge fan of that brand. I wore it all through the Buffalo Bills playoffs.
Thank you very much. We saw you.
Yeah, we were rocking it.
We
drinking
posted
beers
you,
in
like,
the parking lot.
Yes, you were.
But I mean, like some of the numbers that you can at least see online with some of these companies and you know, the accuracy of them, we still have to go through. But like you look at like Skims, you look at 500 million at least was what we saw online. Good American revenue of 150.
I feel like they underplayed me.
They underplayed you, aren't they?
That's a $4.2 billion valuation
well,
you have over there.
They're saying the revenue number is 500 million. That's
also
wrong.
underplayed.
Underplayed. See? And that's why we have this
Glad you said
podcast. Now, we're going to get to the numbers. We'll get to all the businesses that you're a part of. Before we do, though, obviously these are huge numbers with huge businesses that almost every single person listening to this podcast will have recognized. When we talk about money and recognition and all these things, I want to start from what it looked like even before high school. Just in general, you're grinding, paper route, always selling something. What was your relationship with money growing up? And what was that like in your family dynamic? And how has that led you to some of these big numbers today?
Well, honestly, I love that you start there because I grew up as a really poor kid. I'm one of four girls raised by a single mum in East London, which is, you know, like, I don't know, the equivalent of being raised in like Brooklyn or, you know, like Long Beach or so, you know, it's a place that is very kind of formative when I think about who I am. Yeah. But I grew up like not having much and really my mum having to count every single penny. You know, it was about how are you keeping the lights on? How are we buying our groceries this week? And understanding the value of everything. But I never think about that as something that held me back. In fact, it was really about me knowing what we had and knowing how to make things like last and stretch, right? It's like if we had 60 quid, my mum had to feed 4 kids, 60 pounds. Sorry, I'm very English. You know, it's like if we had that little bit of money, we would need to figure out how are you going to get 3 meals a day out of that? How are you going to keep the lights on? How are you going to pay the guy that delivers the milk? And that was really, I think, my first kind of formative relationships with money came from watching my mum budget, and she would budget every single line item, write it down, and be to the absolute penny. So I learned that from a very, very young age. And I think still to this day, I know the price of everything. You know, I don't do my grocery shopping, but I can tell you like what everything costs. And I have a very, still like I would say like an emotional relationship with money, and eventually like running out of money. That would be like something that I think about constantly.
It's really interesting to think that like behaviors you develop as a kid could be the same behaviors that you're applying to a $4 billion plus valuation business like Skims still to this day. I mean, that's pretty cool.
And you know, I think it's cool, but I also think it gives you a level of, you know, responsibility, because when I raised money for the first time for my first venture, you know, I treated that money like it was my own, right? There was no sense of, oh, like I've raised a couple of $1 million and now I get to go and squander this around and see, you know, we'll see what sticks. I was like, this is precious, this is finite, this has a weight and a value to it. And I treated it like it was my own. And I think that when you're an investor, and certainly as an investor now, I'd love to think that my founders actually treated my money like that. So it set me up in a really good way. And I'm very intentional when I think about money, and indeed how I equate value to things.
Very fascinating. When you talk about your first raise, I see that your first company is ITB Worldwide. Started that at 26 and then you went on to sell it. Was that the first company you did a raise for?
Absolutely. And it was so interestingly enough, it's an interesting story because that company had a lot of different iterations. Technically speaking, Good American was really the first company that I made a raise for, because that company was formed out of me acquiring. I first started an entertainment marketing agency. So I was working on putting partnerships and collaborations together between brands and artists, or brands and celebrities. And then I started acquiring businesses. So I would acquire like a little PR agency, a little VIP agency, and I started a licensing company, and I pretty much amalgamated all of these companies, put it together, and that's what I eventually sold as ITB Worldwide. So technically the first time I actually went out and raised capital was for Good American.
And so that's fascinating. When you started this company, that was like an agency that you continued to piece together. When that happened, like, did you start that all by yourself? Did you have partners? How much did you have to invest from the get-go to get it going?
So from the beginning, it was just sweat equity. It was me. I worked as a division of a PR agency. I was the only one billing, and the two guys that run that agency came to me and said, hey, would you like to start your own company? We think we see something special. You're the only one making any money here. Maybe we should spin you out and we'll do a joint venture. And honestly, I went home and like Googled what is a joint venture. And I was like, yeah, I'll do it.
Sounds good.
Sounds great. You know, how much do I get? And they were like, you'll have 51%. And I was like, well, that sounds amazing. And so, so the first thing that I ever did was really try to understand how I could have ownership in this thing. But for me, it was all sweat equity. And they invested in the back office, the infrastructure, and some staffing for me. And it was all about, you know, it was me on my own from the beginning. I wrote every proposal. I delivered all of the work. I then would, you know, create the invoice to send to the client. But it was like a complete startup in every sense of the word.
My curiosities are just driving me. But at this point, you have your own PR shop. Like, who are you managing? Are you managing brands or people at this point?
Actually, at the time, it was brands. So my job was really to connect the brands to the people. So, you know, it's like I would be representing a car brand or an alcohol brand or a fashion brand. And they would say, go fetch. Like, we want to do. And back then, they weren't even influencers. These were like bloggers to begin with, you know, like chefs or, you know, a CEO. And it was all about like trying to connect those brands. And of course, as my agency got bigger and bigger, the clients got bigger and bigger, and then the talent got bigger and bigger. So I was booking, you know, Gwyneth Paltrow or Natalie Portman on a Dior commercial. But in the beginning, it was tiny and all based in London and about doing tiny little deals. $5,000 here, $10,000 here, $25,000. I remember when I got a $25,000 deal, I was like, yes. And I was taking a percentage of those deals.
Of course, yeah. Now, I think everyone listening to this can really connect with the grind of exactly what you're talking about. Like, there's going to be entrepreneurs like, I'm there. I got my own little thing. I got a couple thousand, 2,000. I'm representing an alcohol brand or maybe like a chip brand, but I can't even fathom. How could I make a jump to a Gwyneth Paltrow? That's a huge jump to make. So for those people out there that are kind of just grinding and fighting the way you were fighting, and then you were able to make this jump to where you are now, what was it? Like, how do you go from just representing the small people to then someone like doing a deal with Gwyneth, and then of course partnering with the Kardashians on many of their ventures?
Well, I love that you asked this question, because I think it's something that people think about all the time. And I think it's something that even in my own companies now, as people are coming up, they're like, how do I get to the next place? Like, what's in my future? How do I meet this like place and meet my ambition? And to me, it's all about being excellent at what you do today. Unless somebody really values what it is that you're doing and you are absolutely amazing at what you're doing, nobody looks at you for the next thing. And honestly, for me, I grew through reputation alone. You would do one job for a PR company or for an agency or for a brand, and they would say, oh, we just won this other piece of business, maybe you could come in on that. Or, you know, somebody would jump ship and go to another company and you would be like over there providing services there. And my business grew purely by recommendation, by association, by the jobs that I'd done. And I used to tell myself, you are only as good as the last job you've delivered. So everything has to be excellent. I prided myself on being whatever my clients needed, I would be there and I would do it, and I would go that extra mile, and I would really, really think about how can my agency stand out? Like, what is the extra thing that we could do to make ourselves better than the competition? And so I was really all about just being brilliant at this very, very narrow thing that we did, which was booking celebrity talent, booking artistic talent. And I got very good at it, right? My contracts got really sharp. I understood how to look for the pitfalls. And inevitably, when shit hits the fan, when things go wrong, I would be there to work things out. And I think that what happened a lot in those days is that your broker, your agency was nowhere to be seen on the day of the shoot, you know, throughout the duration of like whatever that campaign was. And so I was like, you know what, if this is a 6-month contractual term, I'm in for the 6 months. So you might have just paid me to do that one contract, but I'd be there for the life cycle. And actually what happened in that business was the advent of social meant that, you know, it used to be about you do the shoot is the advertising campaign and everybody goes off. As social media came in, that really changed because the deliverables changed. And so me then saying, I'm not just here for the shoot and for the contract, but I'll stay through the duration of the contract, meant that I was there to help the brand get their deliverables. And when the, you know, difficulties arise, I'd be there to unstick that. So I kind of just got a reputation for myself as being somebody that was very full service, and that kind of then permeated down into the agency. And by the time I had 5 or 10 or 15 staff, like that was just our service offering. That's what we did. That's what we were known for. And that's why brands will come to us.
Yeah, I think it is so fascinating, because that differentiation, it's like the idea of just saying, what is my peer group doing? And then how am I going to do things differently, do it consistently, and then realize that my last deal, I'm only as good as, and I'm going to continue to step it up from there and there and there. From a time period perspective, you build the agency, you piecemeal it together, and then you just said your first real raise was with Good American. And so this is in 2016, Good American is founded, and you change the entire dichotomy for the denim business, right? Like, so the way that you are having trend forward designs, but also that fit women of all sizes. And so this is 2016. How does this connect as far as like, how long have you been with your agency at this point before Good American was established?
It was a full 10 years.
10 years.
Which is wild when I think about it. And, you know, I never want to gloss over it because I made so many mistakes. I cannot tell you, you know, we were killing it in London. And with, you know, I remember thinking quite highly of myself because I was still young and, you know, the work was fun. And so I opened an office in LA and I opened in New York. I failed so miserably in LA because I kind of, you know, like I really believed that we were the best and that I could export what I was doing anywhere. And so I hired a few amazing people and I came to LA and I failed miserably. It was the biggest waste of money, the worst experiment. I just, you know, it was really eye-opening. But in a way, it really informed everything else that I did because I went back and I said, do you know what? I only need to fail once, right? I'll make a mistake and I'll take that mistake on the chin, but I ain't going to do it again. And so I took a couple of years to recover and before I would then open in New York. And that was really formative for me because I understood so much about the American market, then so much, you know, for me, it was like America, right? I was like, America's America. I was like, I had no idea the difference between operating on the East Coast versus the West Coast.
Night and day.
Like night and day.
Yeah.
And even the agencies, right? The agencies from London to New York were very transferable. There were so many similarities, but you got to the West Coast and it was like literally the wild, wild West, totally different market, totally different expectations, like, and no, you know, there's such a community on the West Coast and I wasn't part of that. So I made a lot of mistakes and it took me a while to come back from that before I could open a New York office. And then before I could really kind of get my strength up to do something that in my mind was like global again.
I'm glad you touched on failure because you've had so many successes. And when I saw your resume, I'm like, where has been, like, where have you missed? Because it doesn't look like you've missed in anything.
Oh, I've missed so much.
Have you?
Yeah, I honestly do think I've missed so much. I think early in starting ITB, I don't think I understood really the strength that you have as a founder and a CEO to set the agenda early on, right? I was like, our business was all about winning business. It was all about going and finding business.
Sure.
And so I thought if you were good at that, then that's all that mattered. I don't think I really understood the strength of relationships and hiring the right people and really the I guess like the curvature of the people that you needed, like different people doing different things within the business. I thought if everyone was like me, like a sales animal, that we would kill. And you know, it's like I built this service offering, but didn't really build the staff needs, the resource needs to back that up. And so I think I made a ton of mistakes in how I was hiring, you know, how I was running the business. I overstaffed and I had to make a reduction in force at some point. And so there's just been so many things that I've done not so well. But like I said, I am somebody that learns very quickly and I tend not to make the same mistakes twice.
Amazing. So let me ask you this though. The number one reason why you failed in LA, it's got me thinking, like, what was it?
An ignorance to the culture, which I think is so led by community more than anywhere else in the world.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is LA is so small, right? Like when you think about it, there are more people in a borough of London than there are in like the whole of LA.
Yeah.
Everybody knows each other. Everybody does business with one another. You know, it's like I go to the Lakers now and I know like I can go around and like I'll know like hundreds of people there.
Yeah.
I've lived here for like not that long. And so there's just this very small community and everybody is doing business with one another. And I didn't have the level of respect for that I needed to come here and be successful.
Yeah.
I kind of come with my reputation from Europe thinking that would be enough. And it was like, no, thank you.
Check that at the door. You got to reestablish yourself in LA.
You got to start from zero.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really fantastic lesson because in as much that I've had success, you know, I think that you're always starting from the beginning. So if I think about Offseason, which is a new venture, I take the experience from everything else that I've done, but I take none of the mentality. I take none of the imagination that what I've done somewhere else is transferable into this business. And so it really is about taking everything from a starting point and saying, how can I do the best with this thing? Bring my knowledge, bring my enthusiasm, bring what I've learned, but don't take anything for granted because the time, the culture, the moment, the product, like all of that has to fall into line. And so you're not able to just like transfer things. Otherwise, you know, everything would be Skims and I'd have 10 of them.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. There's setbacks, there's growth, there's changes, and then there's movement. And then, of course, like Good American, massive movement. Now, the question I have about Good American, you got 23% stake in the company, and you co-founded this with Khloe Kardashian. Mm-hmm. You, at this point, have credibility in LA. You've built an agency in LA. You're running the show, and you're doing big things. That being said, one of probably the hardest people to just meet, let alone have a meeting with, let alone start a company with, one of the Kardashians, and you co-found it with Khloe Kardashian. So talk to the people back home and myself about what type of process do you undergo to take your skill set, which is so differentiated and successful, and be able to partner up with someone who is so differentiated and successful in an area, though, that there is so much demand to work with someone like that.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's really difficult and I will never speak on Khloe's behalf because, you know, I'm sure she had her own feelings about why she decided to partner with me. But from my point of view, you know, I had spent 10 years at the intersection of brands and entertainment. Yeah. And so I knew a lot about how you put brands and talent together to accelerate a business, right? I had done that over and over and over again. And so really for me, what it was taking everything that I knew, everything I'd learned, and honestly, all of the mistakes that I had made throughout that time working with different brands in ITB and trying to do something differentiated. And I think that honestly, the most important thing, because people like to look at, the partnership, like that was like the most important thing. It was an important thing. But actually, I think what made Good American so successful was that we came into the market with a highly differentiated product and a story that was right for the time. If you go back to that time, 2016, no one was talking about body positivity then. No one was talking about plus size influencers. It was really much more of a fringe movement happening in that community. And what I learned from 10 years of working with fashion brands and lifestyle brands and beauty brands was that there was an enormous amount of women that were completely left out of the fashion conversation. And so it really came from that key insight. Like, what can you do that doesn't exist in the marketplace today where there's a huge need? And I had been on enough sets, I'd been on enough shoots, I'd been in enough campaigns where I knew that that customer was massively overlooked. And I had the insight, I think, just as being a woman, that that's just not how women think. We don't think based on our size, like what we would want, what trend we want to get into. You see a nice pair of shoes, you want the nice pair of shoes. You see the good swimsuit, jeans, whatever it is, you're like, I want that. Not, oh my God, I want a size 16 one of that, or a size 2 one of that, or a size 22 one of that. So for me, it was just about putting those things together and doing something that felt highly differentiated. And I never want, I think that we've seen a lot of celebrity brands that have failed more than have succeeded. And so for me, it was really about what's the solution, how you bring in a best-in-class product to market. And the talent piece was an accelerator to all that. But customers won't part with their money more than once if they're not getting true value. And so what we did was obsess over, what are we giving customers? How do you put customers at the center of what you're doing? And yes, the marketing piece was wonderful, but we were really obsessing over what can this customer not get elsewhere and what can we uniquely give them.
That is so fascinating. And then obviously since then you've had massive success with Skims, Safely, Kai, we've talked about Offseason brands and many other business ventures. But I always think a lot of people back home, the first one is what intrigues them, because that is the hardest if you don't have a massive form of credibility to get it off the ground and running. You obviously have huge success with what you're doing and how you're doing it and differentiated, but then you got to go to the table and you got to raise capital for an industry that is so competitive, in which majority, like you said, a lot of these companies, they start and flop. Celebrity-backed brands, they can start and flop. And then you're competing in the apparel space against some of the biggest behemoths. So at this point with Good American, when you're sitting down to raise capital, and this is really like your first big baby doing it, what are you saying to these investors to capture their attention, but also capture their trust in you to invest? Because I would imagine now with the momentum you have, you could go into any room right now, and just be like, look what I've done. Let's go. Now you're the Pope. Now line up and I'll maybe I'll invite you. But I think what's more relatable to us back home, the people that are just trying to do it for the first time, is like the first time feels like the hardest. So what are some tips you had to get trust without having the massive resume that you currently have?
Well, I have to be really honest, because if you would have said, VCs to me back then, I would have just drawn a complete blank. I had such a limited understanding of that world, how you raise finances, what valuations should be. I just didn't know. What I knew was, I had very naively mapped out the basis of a business plan. I was like, what's going to get me through to month 24? In my head, I was like, it's going to take me a couple of years to get to profitability. How do I create something, like a 24-month runway? So that was like my starting point.
Okay.
I'd figured out that I needed $3 million if things went okay. Like that's kind of where I was. I was like, I can probably make this stretch. Like that's what I'd need. And I, mapped it all out. Then I was like, where am I getting $3 million from? And it was really that simple. So that was my starting point, but I didn't know anyone. And again, I was sitting in London, very, very different, place, like capital of kind of, finance in Europe, but, banking, and not something that I really understood. And so for me, again, it was like leaning back into well, who knows me, more importantly? Okay. How will I get them to trust me? And so I went to clients and I went to my bosses. I went to the guys that had invested in me to help me set up that first company. And one of my clients who I'd been delivering amazing work to for 7 or 8 years. And I was like, hey, like, you're in retail, you understand apparel. I've got this incredible idea. Would you give me $3 million? I went to my business partners and I was like, hey, I've got a second amazing idea. You've made a bunch of money out of me in the agency. How do you fancy giving me $3 million? They both looked at me and was like, are you insane? Like, what is this idea? Yeah. You are not an
good
apparel
American
CEO.
Jeans,
like,
what?
yeah, like who needs another pair of jeans?
Yeah.
And, you know, and I think that what happened is there was that trust there and that track record there that both of them were like, do you know what? We'll take a punt. And I got $1 million off of each and was like, okay, well, now I've got 2. I've got an 18-month runway, which, by the way, I absolutely didn't. But that's a different story. But in my head, I was like, okay, I'll make it work on the $2 million. Okay. And that was the end of that.
So $2 million is what you raised to get Good American off the ground and running. Unbelievable.
Yes.
And how do you decide, like, I think a big position that founders get stuck in is percentage of equity. So 23% is your stake in that company. How do you know, like, what is the right amount to take when you're raising?
Well, 23% wasn't what I started with because, you know, one of my rules in life is that you should take some money off the table as you go in.
Good.
And thank God I have done that repeatedly throughout my career.
That's a good trading secret right
there.
Yeah,
because listen, you know, and I often say this to founders. I'm like, you can have 100% and nothing. It's still nothing. For me, I had nothing to trade with at that time, right? So my sweat equity was all I had. All I had was that plus a track record. So to me, it was better to give something away to start something because I was like 32 then. So in my head, I was like, I've still got a runway. I could make this work and still have another 2 chapters after it. So better for me that I would give something away and actually be able to start something. So I didn't stress about, I need 100% of this. I was like, was very strict about what I needed in return for the investment. And so for me, it was about a mixture of infrastructure and then expertise. So Andrew Rosen, who was one of my first investors, this is a guy that had built so many incredible brands and been part of so many incredible apparel startups from, you know, Rag & Bone to Frame to Alice and Olivia, he was involved in Uniqlo and Theory and all of these incredible things. So more than just the money, with Andrew, still to this day, I opened a store in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago and I was like, I think I messed up all the tables. And he's like, yeah, your folding and nesting tables are just terrible and I would have done X, Y, and Z. So he can go from like 5-year business strategy and how much money do you think I should raise for this thing down to like just really tangible stuff that unless you've been doing it for 30, 40, 50 years, you just wouldn't know. And I think that my biggest takeout was like, don't just take the money. Like, don't sweat the equity. Sweat what you're getting in return aside from the money. Like, make sure your investors are worth something else to you. And I think that was hands down to this day, considering I'm still in business with all 3 of those people that came in. That was the best decision. It wasn't about how much I gave away. It was what I was getting in return aside from the cash.
Interesting. Okay, so it's what you're getting from their expertise.
Yes.
It's your first big business. You raise the capital. You partner with Chloe, and you have a product that's differentiated and you're ready to go to market. How long did it take for the company to be profitable?
Not that long. We were profitable in the first year. Which was absolutely amazing. That's not to say we've been profitable every single year.
Sure.
But we were profitable right out the gate. And I always attribute this to some of those early investors because you have to remember it's 2016. In 2016, we're in the height of the direct-to-consumer boom. So you had these insane companies out there, Everlane, Reformation, Warby Parker, that were all absolutely killing. And, you know, I think that what was happening more broadly in the market is that people were paying so much money to acquire a customer and no one was thinking about the bottom line. And so I had one half of my board of directors that were just like, you should just spend, acquire customers, just grow the top line, don't worry about what's happening from a profit perspective. And I had these much kind of, they hate to be called the old guys, but I'm always like, the old guard we'll call them, right? It's like these guys that had just been around for a lot longer and they were like, I don't care what this D2C thing is. Eventually you'll need to be in wholesale. Eventually you'll need to open your own stores and your optionality will be greatly reduced unless you have money on the bottom line. And for me, that really made sense because I thought to myself, wow, how do you do all the things you need to do in a company unless you've got money to spend?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, immediately you don't have the options to do fantastic campaigns. You don't have the option to start new, categories. You don't have the option to open stores everywhere unless you got money on the bottom line. So I did. I listened to the old guard, and it was probably the best decision I could ever make, because we never had an unhealthy business. And as the tides have turned post-COVID, post the algorithmic changes in Google and Facebook, post us being able to do business in the way that we started for the first 3 years of the company, we would never have survived.
So with the strategy of saying, like, we're going to focus on profitability, but also great products, but we have to reduce the amount that we're going to spend to acquire new customers. What did you find? A lot of business owners back home could hopefully connect with this. What did you find was the most efficient means of marketing and spend to acquire new customers?
So again, I don't want to say that we didn't rely on anything like Facebook and Instagram.
Sure.
That was a huge part of it. But actually being like in real life with customers, like meeting customers where they were at and creating community around our brand. Again, we're going back 8 years now, but it just wasn't being done. One of the best things that we ever did was this open casting. And it was every single year we would go out and we would be in Nashville, we'd be in Chicago, we would be, like in the middle of this country, meeting thousands and thousands of women that loved our brand and talking to them about who we are, what we stand for, what our values are. We'd run this huge model competition. We would get, like our own community to be in the campaigns. And there was just like some sense of connection between the brand saying that it was for real women and really being about real women, really going into communities and understanding what the needs of those women were. And for me, I didn't really know it at the time, but it became this like sort of amazing exercise in collecting data, because I would fly into these cities, spend 2 days, speak to 400 women and actually understand what they were concerned about. And I think some of the biggest unlocks in our business came from just listening to what people were saying. Some woman said to me, my thighs rub together because my thighs chafe and I get big holes. And I was like, you do? And she's like, well, yeah, all plus size women, our thighs rub together as we walk. And I was like, oh my God, not only do I need reinforced belt loops, but I need to reinforce the inner panel of jeans. And that was like it was such a big thing, and I would never have done that because that wasn't like something that we were talking about in our design team. So there were a lot of things that happened because we went into the community, we were in real life, and in a time when digital was ruling everything, we were in front of customers, meaning we made a connection and we meant something to them.
And the cost of doing that is what? Next to nothing.
Minuscule.
Having a conversation with a consumer.
I would fly 4 people to my office. We'd go to a Nordstrom location, so we were actually supporting the sales of one of our wholesale partners. We'd bring thousands of people into the store. Nordstrom can thank me later. And then we would meet these people in real time and have great connections with them. And it became one of the things that I think every person who works for Good American would look forward to that time of year and be like, oh my goodness, how can I be involved? It energized the office environment too. And it just became something that everybody loved about what we were doing.
I love it. It is fascinating. The one thing I did say earlier in this podcast, I said a revenue number of 155 million. How off am I with that?
Revenue for Good American?
Yeah.
Round about the ballpark. We've been up and down. It's a tough year this year, but we'll be ever so slightly north of that.
Okay, ever so slightly north of that. Now, as someone that started Good American, founded it, and you are now a shark on Shark Tank, I want you to think about
I'm a guest shark.
You're a guest shark. Let me correct that. A guest shark.
All right.
I want
Before
the people.
Someone thinks I've got a new job.
Yeah, that's true. Let's make
in.
that correct. She's moving in. All right. So as a guest shark on Shark Tank, I want you to go into the shark mode right now.
Okay, let's
155 million plus dollar revenue company, Good American. Someone is sitting in front of you right now with a apparel company, and they are pitching you exactly why you should invest in them. To you, what are the top 3 things that you're considering as a potential investor when you're seeing someone potentially launch an apparel company?
So I think apparel company, but all company, I'm all about the founder.
Interesting.
I need like an obsessed founder, because at the end of the day, all businesses go through high points and low points. And to me, it's so much about what is the attitude, not the experience, what is the attitude of that individual? Are they someone that is just built leaning into what it is that they're doing? Are they resilient? Are they obsessed with what they're doing? So I really love to get that feeling from a founder off the bat. And I would say I could get like a treble A idea with a C founder and not go for it.
So do you think that's the number one most important thing for the success of a business?
I mean, yeah, I would like to say so, because look, at the end of the day, who sets the culture, who sets the agenda, who sets the vision, who's executing the strategy?
True.
For me, it's like founder. Now, once things get to a scale, you absolutely don't want it to be a founder. And I've been in that position when I actually sold my first business and the acquirer was happy to let me leave. I remember feeling devastated. I was like, but I am the company. And they were like, no, you've actually built a really brilliant business that doesn't rly on you. And I was like, but I want to say.
You're like, it's my baby. Meanwhile, that's the dream.
My husband was like, take the check, shut up, move on. There's no buying, you can go. But, for me, I'm very focused on like, who is the founder? Why do they come into this work and what drives them? Because you know that with businesses, you are going to have really difficult moments, and the integrity and the ambition and the viewpoint of that founder is often what will get you out of like some of the most difficult situations.
Okay, so number one thing as a guest shark, you're thinking founder. What are the next two?
Well, here's the thing. It kind of goes back to the founder bit. I am yet to meet a founder that I will enjoy working with who isn't their own best salesperson. So if somebody is saying to me, listen, I came up with this idea, I'm the engineer, but I'm going to bring in these other people that are going to package it, market it, sell it, I'm like, again, not interested. I need you to be able to sell.
Interesting.
Like that is it. You've got it. Like wherever that is, like you have to be at the person that crafts the story and can go out and find an audience. And to me, the primary job of somebody that is in that driving seat position is the vision. Right? I need you to have the vision. You don't necessarily need all the strategy, but I need you to have that North Star, and I need you to be able to go and sell.
Interesting. The founder,
1,000%.
Can you sell, and what is the vision? Those are the top three.
1,000%.
Those are great three. All right, so we're moving on to Skims now. So Good American, we already talked about 155 million plus in revenue. Then you start Skims 3 years later, and as everyone knows, I mean, I don't need to say this, but you guys know, you guys created the next generation of underwear, loungewear, and shapewear. Everyone knows that. But in such a short period of time, the numbers I'm seeing are 500 million, partnering with Kim Kardashian. What is it when you think about Good American and Skims, both extremely successful? Why do you think Skims was able to grow as fast as it was in such a short period of time?
It's a difficult one for me to answer, but I always feel like, I'm part of a team at Skims, and I feel like that's a really important starting point. It's, it was Kim's idea. Kim is the founding visionary of that company. I actually work as the chief product officer. My husband is the CEO of that company. And there was such an amazing group of people that brought that company to life. And I think that when you think about any great business, you've got to have an incredible idea. You've got to have an incredible product, but you also need the stars to align, right? There was something in what was happening in culture at large. There was something about what we were doing and the way that we were doing in the time we were doing it that just meant that everything kind of came together in this great order. And so, again, if I had all the magical answers for why that company was so successful and so brilliant, we'd be doing them all day long.
That's true.
I'm just a small part of something that has gone so extraordinarily well and something I'm so proud of being a part of. But, my job there is chief product officer. What I do is oversee design and production, merch and planning. And so again, I'm back in the driving seat as somebody who is across the product. If Kim can envisage it, if Kim wants something in the line, my job is to make that happen. My job is to essentially get to the point where we have the right product at the right price and it goes out into the market in the right way. And it is, honestly, if I thought about everything that I did everywhere in my life, like that's the bit I love the most. It's like my dream job at Skims.
Is a CPO of Skims. That's like the dream job. Okay.
Dream. It's the thing that I love the most.
Why?
I just love products. I'm such a, it's like I love the detailed orientatedness of it. It's like for me, I just love getting into the weeds and the details and speaking to vendors and talking about fabric and componentry, and I love pricing. And I think I have a very, very good sense. It's like if I have a superpower, it's understanding what women, girls, people need and how much they want to pay for it. And so you kind of develop this touch after a while for where consumers are going. And you also start to see patterns in things, right? And I think what's so nice about how I work is, you know, you look at denim, for example. Denim works like in cycles. There are trend cycles in denim. So, you know, it's like when I was younger, it was all about the skinny jean, and like things move and they move, and then you get into flares and straights. Right now, you know, for the last few years, we've been in a kind of low slung, baggy moment. And these cycles last a really long time. What's so nice about my job is how I get to put those insights together and couple the data and say, okay, well, if the bottom silhouette is really baggy, chances are she's going to want something small and tight on top. That means I can sell hundreds of thousands of baby tees over at Skims.
Interesting.
And so, you know, it's kind of interesting, as I never thought of myself as a merchant, but I think what I am at heart is just like a pretty good merchant, somebody who knows what people want to buy when they want to buy them and can hopefully put the right product out at the right time.
You gave us the example of Good American where you did the focus group at Nordstrom. That information allowed you to change that product. I think about Skims and just the ever-changing. It feels like the only constant right now, especially with trends and the way things are moving, is change. So how, and you talked about how you're keeping up with it and adjusting things with, you know, the skinny top because of the baggier bottom. But do you have any type of trading secret as to how you're keeping up with trends that are changing so fast? Are you studying other cultures? Are you looking at like a Tokyo or an Italy or something like that? Is there any type of trading secret in keeping up with things that are moving so fast?
I think that if you really want the honest answer to that, we're creating the trends, because if you are trying to look to what everybody else is doing, you're always going to be behind the curve. And I think what Skims has done so beautifully is create things that don't exist in the marketplace, right? There was no one-legged shapewear. There was no nipple bra. Like, we make the trend, and by the time everybody else has figured out how to do it, we're on to the next thing.
Interesting.
So that's, I think, what is way more interesting a place to be.
What a power answer. We don't study the trends. We make the damn trends.
We're balling out here.
That is a great place to operate from. We try. You are actually making the trends. That's phenomenal. I mean, it's to see what's happened in the apparel company, the growth of this. And you're saying this is a company now, it's worth over $4 billion.
Ain't it just? I mean, yeah.
$4 billion.
I don't let the valuations bother me.
Okay.
Because I just think it's a fleeting moment in time. And what is a valuation unless there's a transaction attached to it, right? It's like, I've seen way too many people have fabulous valuations and come out with nothing. You know, what I really believe is that valuation is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king.
There you go. That's a power line right there. You're creating trends. You got it all down to a T. A word that you have used often in just this interview, and I've heard you use on other interviews, is culture and people. And so I think culture is probably one of the hardest things to drive in everything, in businesses, in new businesses, in relationships, in families. Like, driving the culture and the tone that you're setting is extremely hard, and it takes day-to-day work. What is it, and why do you keep using the word culture, and how big of a differentiator has it been in the success of these companies?
So for me, culture is everything. I think people get really, really tripped up, and I like to think of it in a really succinct and easy way, because it's very, very hard to define culture. You know, so many big companies write these giant manifestos about what their culture is, what it means. But here's a really definitive way for anyone to think about it. Culture is who you hire, who you fire, and who gets promoted. That's what actually defines your culture. Who do you bring in to your organization, right? Who gets to come into that and be at the decision-making table? Why and when does somebody actually get fired? Meaning that they are not a fit for the culture that you are trying to create. And who gets promoted? Somebody that reinforces the culture that you guys are trying to permeate through the organization. And so I think that you can really think about who are we and what we're doing through those three lenses. And that for me has been just the most helpful thing. And so when I think about what I'm trying to do, which is to foster a really inclusive culture, which is to say that the more people that you bring, like from different points of view, different backgrounds, that get to add into the decision-making process, the more reflective you'll be of your customer base, and the better and stronger and more resilient your business will be. But that's about who you're hiring, right? Who gets to come in. And so I think that when you're thinking about you know, what kind of place do I want to build? I spend 20% of my time finding the right people. Who has the right attitude? Who has the right level of flexibility? What type of people do I want to be with and build with and permeate through my organization and be there for the younger people to learn from? Those decisions are mission critical, and they will define the type of culture that you have and what you allow to happen at your organization. And so I would really look to like how you're thinking about people as to how you're shaping the culture of your business.
You have such power lines, like, and it's concrete in what you're doing and how you're doing it and what's led to your success when you talk about hire, fire, and promote. And I always like to think about when people are listening to this, like the takeaway, because the line is so powerful. But like with hiring and firing and promoting, within any of those, do you have any rules of thumbs or secrets that you're just like, this is typically what I do? Like typically you'll get hired when I see this, or you'll get fired the second this happens, or promoted in this. What are those? Because this is like, this is now you're getting, now this is like professor, you're giving us a master class.
I'm going to answer your question. And let me tell you the reason I have so many good lines, because I think that as a leader, your job is to communicate really clearly and really effectively. No one in my organization ever sits around going, I wonder what Emma's thinking. You know what I'm thinking. I'm going to tell you, right? Because I'm so clear in my expectations. I'm so clear in my communication. And so when I'm thinking about hiring people, I do that kind of slowly. Like, I am going to see if I have a good position available in one of the companies, I am going to go out and really use that opportunity to figure out, how do you structure your department there? What does that look like? How many people can I meet? I almost like vet, you know, I'm like, what does it look like where you are currently? How is your department structured? What decisions happen in what places? So I really use those opportunities as I'm hiring people to learn more about my competition, to learn more about how other people are doing it, perhaps better than me, and to learn like how I'm going to progress. So I take a long time to hire people. I am quick when I fire. If I have that feeling, I do not sit and, you know, try to work it out, figure it out. Like, I'm allergic to that. It's like, you know what, better to pay people a handsome severance and move them on out quickly, because it doesn't get better, right? Whatever feeling you've got, whatever's happening in your organization, it's like, act quickly, act decisively, get that person out. If you make a mistake, you make a mistake, but more often than not, I'm right in my instinct and my intuition. And I'm like, do it quick. Don't let it fester. It's never worked out for me, like when I've like held and waited. And promotion for me is like, who deserves it? Not like who's doing their job and should get the incremental rise and the next, like, you know, position up. It's like, who is out here proving and wanting it and fighting for it and ready for it? And I am very clear. Like, I think that people that have a lot of ambition need to speak up and say it. And I like to know when I've got like those people in my office, and I want them to make it known to me. So I'm like, don't anybody be shy. Like, let's have these conversations, like make yourself known. But I will say the same thing to everybody, like all the time. Like, you better be excellent in what you're doing today. Otherwise, there's just no chance of a promotion. I'm not looking for someone who's like struggling and doesn't really love what they're doing, but fancies that thing over there. I'm like, you're not even in the running. You have to be excellent at what you're doing right now.
Genius. Hire slow. Fire fast, and promote the people that are just extraordinary. Period. End of story. It's unbelievable. And all these unbelievable power lines, successful ventures you had, are why you're starting a new podcast. So tell us a little bit about the podcast you're starting.
Well, I'm so excited about the podcast. I can't even tell you. The podcast is called Aspire by Emma Grede. And, you know, I was thinking for a very, very long time about how I could scale this idea of mentorship. I think so many people, it doesn't matter if I'm out on the street or I do a podcast or I'm on social, like whatever it is, I get the same questions asked over and over and over again. And I'm one of these people that every now and again, you know, I'll go in my DMs and I'll be like, send me your number. I'll jump on the phone to you for half an hour and I'll talk you through this thing, right? If I've understood like an unlock in, you know, logistics that somebody's trying to figure out, or somebody's saying to me, my 3PL trying to charge me, this was what it was yesterday, my 3PL trying to charge me like this amount to, like, you know, put an insert in packages. I was like, that is insane. Like, let's have a conversation about it. And what are you trying to do? So I will get on the phone to people, but that isn't sustainable, right? And I do think specifically in, you know, podcast land, while this kind of media is very, very broad, the kind of viewpoint is extremely narrow, right? There's a lot of men, granted, we love men, doing a lot of business podcasts, but it's very different if you're a woman. And I think that the more we try to hide from that, we're not helping each other. But I also think that women have an enormous amount to learn from men in business. And I think some of my best mentors and some of the people that I've had around me have been so formative. And when I think about what I needed, I have like this amazing bank of people that over 20 years I've built, and I just call them up, you know, and I'm like, how do you do this? Like, what's the best way to do that? And so I was like, can I bring that into a podcast format? Can I actually like be the unlock for some people that are trying to figure out how to start something, how to raise some money, how to get over their fear, how to do a pivot from their corporate job? And I was like, well, I probably can. And then I started calling people. I was like, would you be on my podcast? And so, you know what was so crazy? So many of the people I called had never done a podcast before.
Wow.
And I was like, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
You know, women with like billion-dollar brands have never done a podcast before.
Wild.
So I was like, there's a need, I'm going to do it. Why not?
So when does it launch?
6th of May.
The 6th of May. And have you done any guests yet? That can you tease?
No, I'm not teasing.
You can't
tease.
No, you can't tune in.
I'm not teasing.
All right.
It's very unexpected. You know, it's really interesting. I think there are some people that, you know, you would expect me because of who I am, you know, around to be involved in. But I also think that, like I said, I've been very pleasantly surprised about the number of people I've called and they've said, no, I've never done one before, but yeah, why not? I'm happy to chat with you.
Everyone is going to have to tune into that. I have a feeling just looking at some of the people you have founded business with, I have a feeling it's going to be a stacked guest list. Everyone is going to have to check that out. Who knows? We'll see. You'll have to tune in. I do want to ask you real quickly on Offseason brand. Massive success. It started trending everywhere. You saw Kristin Juszczyk. She's building these jackets. Taylor Swift wears it and takes off. The curiosity I had with that is, did you see, because you're so quick with trends, you create trends and you jump on trends. Was this one of those moments where you saw something moving faster than someone might be able to keep up with and you reached out to them, or how did that work?
No. I wish I could say it was. This was actually an example of someone I looked at and I was like, wow, she is so like me when I was younger. Kristin sent me, I've never counted, but too many DMs to count. She maybe got 10 people to call me. And at some point, I was like, who is this Kristin Juszczyk girl? Like, what? Like, you know, I just couldn't understand how she'd figured out so many ways to get to me. And of course, I just went on her Instagram and that was it. I was like buried in this woman who has taught herself to sew, who had had these like amazing moments, signed a license with the NFL. And, you know, she came to my office. It was so interesting, actually, because I was so blown away. She came with a deck, like a full pitch. She came with all the products she'd ever made, like in suitcases. She sat down in a really like cute suit. She looked so fierce and lovely and fully pitched her idea. And I promise you, what we are doing with Offseason today is what she pitched me in that room.
Wow.
You know, with a team and an infrastructure that I have, you know, helped her put together. But she had a very, very clear vision. And I was like, that is an incredible idea. And I think that it's a perfect example of when what's happening in the broader culture, when we think about what's happening in women's sports, but sport more generally being, you know, back to what it was 20 years ago, ratings through the roof, an amazing, amazing moment in this country for sports and people returning to wanting to be with their family, wanting something wholesome in the current, you know, climate that we're in right now. Like, sports feels like a really safe place.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, there's only one way to get dressed in sports. It's like with this like licensed merch, there's nothing premium.
Yeah.
There is nothing that feels like, oh, I've got to have it.
Correct.
And when I saw her product, I was like, I want that, I want that, I want that. And so all we did was like, I was like, okay, I know how to make thousands and thousands of these instead of you sewing it.
It's unbelievable.
You know, I know how to build a team around this. And so she's in my office and it's been such a lovely partnership. And honestly, I like companies. I love the startup phase. It's like when there's like less than 20 people, I'm like, this is the best thing ever. And that's where we are with Offseason right now. It's little, it's grassroots, it's like just figuring out what we're going to do, and it has just been a joy to work with her.
We've talked a couple numbers with some of the businesses, revenues, maybe units sold. Can you give us any type of like growth, anything with this business?
Well, let me tell you, we had a 98% sell-through, meaning that we sold 98% of everything that we had made.
Wow.
In the first week, which was absolutely insane. And honestly,
have you ever seen those numbers before?
I mean, I saw him at Skims, you know.
Yeah,
I have a way of doing this. And actually, I saw him at Good American, which was so crazy. But the good thing is, at Good American, it took me 3 to 4 months to get back into stock. With Kristin, I had more product straight away. So I'm learning. We're growing over here.
You're learning and growing.
We're backing ourselves up on fabric, let me tell you.
From begging a couple people for a couple $1 million to then having people beg to work with you and a 98% sell-through rate. What a story it's been. I knew an hour wouldn't be enough, but we're at the hour mark. So
wow.
I got to wrap with the trading secret. So it's something, you've given a lot of them in this episode, but something specific to you. People couldn't learn through a textbook or TikTok, a professor or masterclass. They could only learn through your experience. It could be life advice, financial advice. It could be professional advice. What's a trading secret you could leave us with?
You know, it might sound a little bit off because it's not about the money, but I think that when you're starting something, we can get so enamored by these ideas of marketing being so important, right? Like that's the way I'm going to reach a customer, that is the only way to get attention to my brand. And I think that when you do something like really special, when you meet a need, when you solve a problem, when you create a solution, in my experience, that word of mouth, the type of virality that comes from it and the longevity of that far outweighs anything that you can do in marketing. And so just as a total random one, like I think of all the things that I've ever done, we've made some products at Good American that when I go out in the streets, people they say my own copy lines back to me. They say, tummy smoothing technology. They say reinforced belt loops. They say gap-proof brand, like that you would sit down and then not see, your panties when you sit, because that stuff was an experience that they were having that when they bought that product no longer happened. Yeah. And so I think of all the things that we've done, like figuring out what you're solving for, what unique proposition you're solving for, and reiterating that to customers over and over and over again, and to the point of boredom is the best thing that you can do. And when you're 5 years in, 6 years in, 7 years in, 8 years in, like I am in Good American, we still rely on those initial value props that I wrote before we ever had a product. And it has been just the best thing that we've ever done, being able to come back to something that is true, that is authentic, that makes sense to our customers, and it never fails.
Yeah, unbelievable. That is one hell of a trading secret. And I always like to give my trading secret what I'm taking away. So my trading secret, I think, is going to be, I think we live in like a little bit of a celebrity obsessed, public figure obsessed, pro athlete obsessed world where we put people on such pedestals. And even me with my question of saying, how did you be able to partner with the Kim Kardashian or Khloe Kardashian? And I think my takeaway from hearing everything that you've said and the strategy you've used to deploy what you've done is that you don't have to be the pro athlete. You don't have to be the reality star that becomes the A-list celebrity. You can differentiate yourself, and you can differentiate yourself from starting an agency and doing things differently, and then starting a company and doing things differently. And then all of a sudden, because your differentiation is so great, you're not so worried about the differentiation of others. Those people that you look up to, they're on the pedestal, are actually coming to you because you are what's special. And I think anyone that's listening to this has that or could find it. You just got to tap into it.
You just got to tap
and
into it.
I think that's my trading secret from this episode.
I love it. I couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, Emma. Well, thank you for being on this episode. You got a lot going on, but name it all. Where can everyone find everything you have going on?
I would love everyone to tune into Aspire with Emma Grede when we launch on the 6th of May. That would make me so happy. And I'm Emma Grede on Instagram.
Okay. And all the other companies will be in the show notes. This will be a fun recap. But Emma, thank you so much for being on Trading Secrets.
Thank you so much for having me.